Today we'll discuss a book from the late 19th century, Beyond Good and Evil, by philosopher Nietzsche. Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Germany and initially pursued a classical philology education, studying language through texts from ancient Rome and Greece, more like a historian of ancient languages than a philosopher. However, by devouring his old books all day, he'll develop an encyclopedic knowledge of the history of thought, enabling him to demolish this thought and the great philosophers who originated it in freestyle mode. The book begins with debunking its predecessors, dealing broadly with old moralists, and getting caught up in subjects of little interest, such as the difference between appearance and the appearance of reality. He will explain that the reason they argue about these subjects is because they are pessimistic. Basically, it's because their life is terrible, they're depressed like Schopenhauer, who hated sex, saw it as a return to animality, or Kant, with his notion of categorical imperative, explains that the purpose of life is to act reasonably and nicely. He deals with, as I quote, old sermon makers. In fact, all these people would just try to give legitimacy to their intuitions with pompous words and endless texts, describing more the world as they would like it to be instead of the world as it actually is in reality. They often prioritize their own subjective perspectives over objective truth and present their idealized version of the world. He opposes with his philosophy trying to understand the world without moralism, explaining that something being wrong doesn't mean it's false, and that good and evil are inventions of religions and ideologies that prevent us from seeing reality as it presents itself. He will invite future philosophers to embrace optimism, to embrace life, so that the search for truth is enjoyable and not self-mutilation. Instead of writing long, disgusting books of 20,000 pages getting lost in details, prefer small aphorisms, mini paragraphs suggesting the complexity of reality instead of detailing it. Instead of bickering to prove an abstract idea with emotion, already accept that one can be wrong, but also the complexity and nuance of the world. Instead of spending time wondering whether we have good or bad intentions, without caring about their real effects on the world, good intentions which are actually just another way for moralists to distinguish themselves from the masses, it is better to reflect on the consequences and purpose of our actions. Instead of pitying the world, its weaknesses, its misery, focus on elevating oneself, freeing oneself from the heaviness of morality to act justly on this world with liveliness and strength. To do this, one must not be afraid of greatness and therefore assume to deviate from the common people, which would not necessarily be less good or less nice than constantly belittling oneself according to Nietzsche. He therefore proposes in essence to step out of the shadows to reflect and philosophize in the light like a banker, dry, clear, without illusions, result-oriented. He will apply his theory to the Catholic religion by describing how, since the time of the Romans, when it was introduced more as a smiling rapture in front of nature and tolerant of other philosophies, it has evolved into a cult of suffering, a dissection of the soul, in order to list and heal it, unburdening and a nature deemed detestable by the new priests. By the end of the Middle Ages, the religious society vanishes and the focus shifts to debating in salons, discussing the disagreements of the time on knowledge or the origin of the soul, rather than constantly praying or memorizing the Bible. But religion and its self-harm, instead of vanishing, are evolving into a blend of morality with the same self-destructive traits as it has adopted religious biases, and nihilism, the belief in nothing and the notion that everything is equal, resulting in a sense of life's meaninglessness and the futility of action. If there's no God to judge and give substance to good and evil through his divine judgment, these notions lose much of their meaning, and it becomes harder to cling to them with energy, as monks or knights used to do. According to Nietzsche, what he terms the death of God has deprived man of his universal values of good and evil, without providing any substitute, and consequently, rather than embracing nothingness as a mere reality, humanity has descended into a profound depression. Nietzsche will therefore use this genealogical method, which uses the history of a concept to better understand it, in order to criticize morality. According to him, if Socrates had started by triumphing reason over the instinct of the aristocrats of his time, the ancient Greeks following him with Plato would have persuaded themselves that reason and instinct converge mystically towards the same goal, ultimately triumphing instinct, which would later materialize in the Catholic religion, a religion followed by the majority of Europe. As this majority was subjected to masters and therefore obedience and obligations were an integral part of life, it burdened religion then morality with its obligations, heavier and more imaginary than the others, which will even end up contaminating their leaders, who will no longer dare to attempt anything great. Nietzsche will thus see, for example, in Napoleon the proof that these moralists truly await an absolute master with lofty aspirations, who lacks obligations and hence not someone resembling them, without admitting it to themselves. He wants to show severity in the face of stupidity, and will assign the new philosopher to chase it wherever it may be, whether in the naivety of moralists or among the enemies of philosophy who, because they disliked a philosopher or a doctrine, exploit it to unleash their irrational hatred on the discipline. The discipline does not have a good image, already because of its attacks, but also because of the life of scholars away from society, which gives philosophy this image of harmless wisdom, not very enviable, a weird geek thing that turns young people away from this discipline because no one wants to look like a bookworm. He will thus summon the new philosophers to embrace a life of danger, to willingly embrace life as it is, to be joyful and resilient, which will already enable them to be more perceptive, but above all not to succumb to pessimism, nihilism, the everything is equal anyway mentality, in order to forge new values and emerge as the pioneers of humanity towards fresh concepts. He will also give his opinion on different European peoples in this book. Well, it's not the best passage, but basically it calls the English peasants, the Germans stubborn megalomaniacs, the French followers, the Jews strong, and nations artificial. And he sees on the Mediterranean coast a wonderful land where people are happy and philosophical, thanks in particular to the climate. He opposes feminists emerging in his time, starting from his reasoning that gender equality would be good, but not necessarily possible. According to him, women are too superficial to want the truth, despite the importance of women discussed in a passage. Well, same, it's not the best thing he did. And this may be linked to the fact that he got pissed off by Lou Andrea Salome, a 21-year-old girl he was in love with, who ran off with one of his best friends, Paul Ray. Ironically, he demonstrates his own theory that irrational emotions have an impact on philosophical doctrines when applied to himself. He accused his predecessors of pessimism due to their wretched lives. He may be suspected of anti-feminism due to his romantic failures. Well, that being said, 4 years after writing this book, Nietzsche will become completely crazy from 1889 until his death in 1900 at the age of 55. He will start by writing letters to his friends, asking the Emperor of Germany to go to Rome to get killed, the Pope to go to prison, or to kill all the anti-Semites. Then he will be brought back home to spend the last 11 years of his life with his mother, then with his sister, without ever getting better. It is also during this period that he will experience his first real successes, but also where his sister, of German nationalist ideology, will republish or completely rewrite certain parts of his work, which will later allow the Nazis to appropriate his philosophy. Necessarily these moral tales are bad. We need higher values. Fascists who don't get Nietzsche, they like it. While his whole life he opposed and mocked the nationalism and anti-Semitism of his time, going so far as to argue with his publisher and his auto group, the musician Wagner, on this subject, because they were values that he found opposed to his project of liberating Europe from pessimism and nihilism. Later, to conclude, his doctrine on choosing a joyful philosophy instead of pessimism, on the evolution of morality over time, will pave the way for a movement that will deeply mark the 20th century, existentialism, which will explain that values, the purpose of life, are not absolute. There is no mission given to man or humanity to accomplish during his existence, but relative to each individual, that one can therefore freely choose this purpose and these values, and thus give the meaning one wants to one's life.
Well folks, this video is finished. As usual, if you liked it, you can give it a thumbs up, share if you agree, comment if it inspires you, subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this, click the notification bell for direct notifications when a new video is released, join the Discord of the channel with link in the description to discuss or delve into these topics. Come on, bye.